Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. My introduction to Vietnam and this presentation combine to provide both context and causes for the Vietming's resistance war against the French, also known as the First Indochina War, as well as providing context for the Civil War and the war against America. Those causes are, of course, essentially ideological. Nationalism versus imperialism, with communism clouding the American perspective. And in answering a causes of war question, you can focus on either the French War or the American War. It depends on which you feel most confident dealing with. It's only the West that calls the American War the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese, quite rightly from their perspective, refer to the wars separately. And that the American War can also be seen as a civil war is also a factor. But I'll deal with that in a separate presentation. But let me say up front, it doesn't need to be confusing. So don't be put off. Now, as I said in my introduction to Vietnam, the same day as Japan formally surrendered in 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnamese independence before a crowd of 500,000 people in Hanoi. The thing was, with the Japanese defeated, de Gaulle, the French leader, was determined to incorporate the three Indo-Chinese states into the French Union. And there were still rival claims to control Vietnam, or at least parts of the country. There were other nationalist groups, and also in southern Vietnam, centered around Saigon, religious sects like the Cao Dai. What further clouded the situation was that the Allies designated China to accept the Japanese surrender and occupy northern Indochina until stable government had been restored, and authorized Britain to act similarly in southern Indochina. Their arrival and their recognition of French claims further undermined the Vietming's authority. Ho Chi Minh looked to America for moral leadership and for material help in its fight against French imperialism. After all, America had helped them in their fight against the Japanese. America was anti-imperialist and had never had an empire and had never exploited Asian peoples. And as I also said in my presentation introducing Vietnam, in declaring Vietnam's independence in Hanoi, he had quoted from the American Declaration of Independence. And President Roosevelt initially opposed the French attempts to reassert imperial control. American anti-imperialism led America to favour a trusteeship in the first instance and eventually independence. However, as the wartime alliance with the Soviet Union rapidly broke down, and with President Truman hostile to the Soviet Union, it proved impossible for America to see beyond the Vietming's links to the Communists. Ho Chi Minh was a founding member of the Vietnamese Communist Party, later renamed the Indochinese Communist Party, and he had been a member of the French Communist Party. Yes, he was always a nationalist first, and then a communist. So even though America had grave doubts as to whether the French could successfully hold their position in Indochina, it gave France increasing support. Hold on to that for when I look at the American War. De Gaulle added to the pressure for America to do so by making it clear that France needed its empire if it was to recover from the war and stave off communist pressure in Europe, even in France itself. So the French initiated a military campaign against the Vietminh in October 1945, and by February 1946 had re-established control of southern Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh remained flexible in pursuing his key goal, Vietnamese independence. Facing down criticism, he dissolved the Indochina Communist Party and brought smaller nationalist parties into a national assembly, governing the north. Negotiations in Hanoi seemed to produce a preliminary agreement in March 1946, in which the Democratic Republic of Vietnam would be recognized as a free state in the French Union, while southern Vietnamese provinces would resolve their permanent political status in referendums. In June, Ho Chi Minh went to Paris for further negotiations. However, they failed to bridge the gap. Ho Chi Minh wanted independence, but with the French wanting control back, the gap was too big to bridge. Events in Vietnam drifted towards war. By the end of 1946, France controlled Hanoi, though the Vietminh remained in control of much of rural, northern and central Vietnam, and they were doing everything they could to consolidate their control, purging past collaborators, but also nationalist rivals, as well as such social undesirables as landlords and moneylenders. The French, eager not to get embroiled in a costly war, yet remaining determined not to let Vietnam go, again tried to bring Bao Dai into the equation, suggesting a united Vietnam with limited freedom within the French Union, led by Bao Dai. But his acceptance only left him looking like France's lackey. In December 1946, fighting broke out between the French and the Vietminh in Hanoi. And so you can see that the French and the Vietminh, like the Americans and the Viet Cong, and I'll explain the change of name in my presentation explaining the American War, slipped into war without a declaration of war. But the pathway is clear. World War II led to the Japanese invasion of Vietnam and the withdrawal of the French. During the war, Ho Chi Minh's Vietminh fought the Japanese and after the war declared independence, only for the French to try to reassert their control. It was then a fight for independence against an imperial power. So I hope you're not confused and you see the value of this presentation. Now, don't forget there's my website, History Made Easier. That's there to help you too. But for now, let me thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck in your studies. Cheers.